There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that are, in truth, the turning of a key in a lock you never knew was there. They don't announce themselves with thunder or a flash of lightning. They come in the quiet hum of a refrigerator, in the weight of a head on your shoulder, in the scent of rain-soaked cotton and the faint, almost imperceptible shift in the rhythm of another person's breathing. For me, that moment was a Tuesday night in late October, a night indistinguishable from 100 others that had come before it. It was the moment I understood that the architecture of my life, the careful rooms I had built to contain my hopes and my fears, was about to be fundamentally and irrevocably redesigned. The blueprints were being drawn by the unconscious press of a hand against my chest, and I was utterly powerless to stop it. He was asleep. Julian. His breath was a slow, warm tide against the fabric of my t-shirt, a steady, oceanic rhythm that seemed to pull the tension from my own body, drawing it out into the quiet dark of my living room. His head, heavy with the exhaustion of a day spent fighting currents both literal and metaphorical, rested in the hollow between my shoulder and my neck. One of his arms was draped loosely across my stomach, his hand curled into a gentle fist just over my heart, as if he were holding onto something fragile in his sleep. We were a tangle of limbs on my too-small sofa, a composition of exhausted angles and soft shadows cast by the single lamp I'd left on in the corner. For hours, I had sat there, perfectly still, cataloging the sensory data of his proximity. The way a few strands of his dark, damp hair tickled my jaw. The subtle, clean scent of the chlorine that always clung to him, now mingled with the musk of sleep and the crisp autumn air that had followed him in through the door. I had become a custodian of his slumber, a silent guardian of his peace, and in doing so, I had trapped myself in a state of exquisite agony. Because this, I knew, was a boundary being crossed. Not a line drawn in the sand, but a deep, invisible threshold between the world we had inhabited for 6 years and a new, uncharted territory. Our friendship had always been a thing of immense and sturdy comfort, a well-built structure designed to withstand storms. I was the quiet foundation, he was the restless wind. We worked, but this casual, profound intimacy felt different. It was a language I had long dreamed of speaking but had never dared to learn, for fear that my accent, thick with years of unspoken affection, would give everything away. He had drifted off mid-sentence, talking about the relentless pressure of his training schedule, the way the water felt colder this season, the echo of the starting pistol in his recurring nightmares. Then his words had softened, slurring into the quiet cadence of sleep, and his body had simply surrendered to gravity, slumping against mine as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if my body were his home, and I, the quiet observer, the chronicler of moments I was never truly a part of, let him. I let him because turning him away would have felt like a form of cruelty I was incapable of. I let him because, for one selfish, terrifying, and beautiful moment, I wanted to pretend this was real, that this wasn't just exhaustion, that this wasn't just proximity, that this was a choice. We met in the way that so many people do, thrown together by the impersonal logic of a university housing algorithm. I was assigned to room 204, a quiet single at the end of a long, sterile hallway. He was in 205, the room directly across from mine, a space that seemed to vibrate with a constant, low-level energy from the moment he arrived. I remember seeing him for the first time, wrestling a massive duffel bag through his doorway, all broad shoulders and easy confidence, his laughter echoing off the cinder block walls. He looked like the sun had personally decided to take up residence in a person. I, by contrast, felt like a shadow, a creature of quiet corners and muted colors. My world was lived through the lens of a camera, a safe, rectangular frame that allowed me to observe life without having to fully participate in it. I was there to study photography, to learn how to capture light, how to freeze a moment, how to tell a story without a single word. Julian, it seemed, was there to live so loudly and so brightly that he created the very moments people like me felt compelled to capture. He was a swimmer, a nationally ranked athlete on a full scholarship, a body honed by thousands of hours of disciplined motion. His life was a thing of lines and limits. The black line on the bottom of the pool, the edge of the starting block, the hundredth of a second on a stopwatch. Mine was a world of gradients, of developing fluid, and the patient wait for an image to emerge from the ether. Our friendship began not with a grand gesture, but with a series of small, mundane collisions in the hallway that separated our two worlds. It started with a borrowed bottle of laundry detergent, then a shared pizza on a night when the dining hall was closed. He had a way of simply appearing at my open door, leaning against the frame with a disarming grin, and pulling me out of my self-imposed solitude. "Leo," he'd say, his voice always sounding a little too loud for my quiet room. "You've been in here for 5 hours. The world hasn't ended. Come see," and I would. I would follow him out into the noisy, chaotic world he navigated with such effortless grace. I became his designated spectator, the quiet presence in the stands at his swim meets, my camera lens trying to capture the impossible poetry of his movement through water. He, in turn, became the only person who ever seemed truly interested in the quiet alchemy of my darkroom. He would sit on a stool in the corner, bathed in the eerie, safe red light, and watch me for hours as I coaxed images from blank paper. He never rushed the process. He seemed to understand, in a way no one else did, that my silence was not empty. It was full of observation, of thought, of a deep and abiding affection that had taken root so slowly and so quietly that I barely noticed it happening until it was a foundational part of my landscape. I fell in love with him in pieces, a slow and patient accumulation of details, like a photograph gradually coming into focus. It was in the way he'd run a hand through his perpetually damp hair after practice, scattering tiny droplets of water like diamonds in the air. It was in the fierce, almost desperate concentration in his eyes behind his goggles just before a race, a look of such singular focus that it seemed he could bend the world to his will. It was in the surprising gentleness of his hands when he'd look at my prints, holding them by the very edges as if they were priceless artifacts. He had a girlfriend then, a bright, cheerful girl from his economics class named Sarah. She was nice. She was perfect for him, in that easy, uncomplicated way that made sense to everyone. I liked her truly, but I was also quietly, devastatingly, jealous of the way he looked at her, the way he would instinctively reach for her hand, the way their lives were woven together in a simple, declarative sentence. My feelings for him were a complex paragraph full of clauses and subtext, a story written in invisible ink. I packed them away, stored them in a light-proof box in the darkroom of my own heart, and told myself that our friendship was more than enough. It was a rare and precious thing, this bond we had, and I would not be the one to risk shattering it for a love that felt, in all likelihood, impossible. For years, this was our equilibrium. I was his harbor, the one place he could come to escape the relentless pressure of his own ambition. He would talk for hours about splits and times and the politics of the team, and I would listen, offering nothing more than my quiet, unwavering presence. I was the person who knew that he hated the taste of coconut, that he slept with one foot out from under the covers, that he was terrified of letting his father down. He was my connection to the vibrant, kinetic world outside my own head. He pushed me to show my work. He celebrated my small victories. He was the one who insisted I was not just an observer, but an artist. He never seemed to notice the way my breath would catch when he'd clap me on the shoulder, or the way I would study the curve of his smile long after he'd stopped laughing. Or if he did notice, he gave no sign. He treated me with a kind of profound, uncomplicated affection that was both a balm and a constant, low-grade torture. I was his best friend, his brother, his rock. I was a fixed point in his churning ocean, and I had accepted my role. I had learned to live with the quiet ache of it, to find a strange sort of peace in the beautiful, painful certainty of my place in his life. The foundation was solid, the walls were strong. I was safe inside. The first crack in that foundation appeared not as a tremor, but as a slow, creeping fissure. It began the summer after we graduated. Julian had gone pro, a move that surprised no one but seemed to weigh on him more heavily than any of us had anticipated. The The world of professional swimming was a different beast entirely. It was colder, sharper, more solitary. The easy camaraderie of the college team was replaced by a grid of individual ambitions, a pool full of silent rivals. He was training for the Olympic trials, a singular goal that had consumed his entire life. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that seemed to curve his normally straight shoulders. And then he lost Sarah. It wasn't a dramatic, explosive breakup, but a slow, sad erosion. Their futures were diverging. She was taking a job in Chicago. His life was tethered to a handful of elite training facilities scattered across the country. Their love, which had seemed so robust under the bright lights of college, began to look fragile and thin in the harsh glare of the real world. He told me about it one night over the phone, his voice flat and tired. He didn't sound heartbroken, just empty, as if a vital piece of his internal architecture had been removed, leaving a hollow, echoing space behind. That was the shift, the catalyst. His world, once so clearly defined by the black lines on the bottom of the pool, had become a murky, uncertain expanse. He started calling more often, his calls coming late at night when the loneliness was at its most acute. He would talk about the endless, monotonous laps, the ache in his muscles that never seemed to fade, the feeling of being a machine made of flesh and bone. He was adrift, and he was looking for an anchor. I had just moved into my own small apartment, a quiet space above a bookstore that was filled with light and the smell of old paper. I was trying to make a go of it as a freelance photographer, a life of uncertainty and quiet hustle that suited me. My apartment became his destination during his rare weekends off. He would drive for hours, arriving on my doorstep looking frayed and worn, the bright light in his eyes dimmed to a low flicker. He was seeking refuge, a place where he wasn't Julian the athlete, but just Julian. A place where the only thing expected of him was to simply be. And I gave him that. I gave him my quiet couch, my endless patience, my unspoken understanding. I cooked for him, simple meals that he ate with a hunger that seemed more emotional than physical. We would watch old movies, the flickering light of the screen playing across his tired face. He talked less about swimming and more about everything else, about a childhood memory of learning to ride a bike, about his fear that he was wasting his youth chasing a dream that might never materialize, about the strange, hollow feeling of waking up alone in an anonymous hotel room. He was excavating his own soul, and he had chosen me to be the sole witness to the dig. I felt a profound sense of honor and a deep, humming sense of dread. The walls I had so carefully constructed around my own feelings were beginning to feel porous. His vulnerability was seeping through, and I was finding it harder and harder to maintain the safe distance of friendship. I was no longer just his harbor, I was becoming his home, and the danger of that was immense. A harbor is a place you leave. A home is a place you stay. The ritual began on a Sunday night. A storm had rolled in, a furious, theatrical display of thunder and lightning that rattled the old windows of my apartment building. Julian was supposed to have left hours earlier to make the long drive back to his training center. But he'd lingered, and now the rain was coming down in solid, impenetrable sheets. "I should go," he said, for the third time, staring out the window at the deluge. He didn't move. He looked exhausted, the skin around his eyes bruised with fatigue. The thought of him driving for 4 hours on slick, dark roads, his mind already churning with the anxieties of the week ahead, filled me with a sharp, protective ache. "Don't," I said. The word was out before I could stop it. It was too simple, too direct. "It's insane out there. Just stay. You can take the bed. I'll take the couch." He looked at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For a moment, I thought he would argue, that his ingrained discipline would win out. But then he just nodded, a slow, grateful dip of his chin. "Okay," he whispered, his voice rough with tiredness. "Yeah, okay." That night, he slept in my bed, and I slept on the couch, listening to the rain and the sound of his steady breathing through the thin wall. It was an arrangement born of practicality, of safety, of friendship. It was innocent, but as I lay there in the dark, a strange, hopeful current was running through me. A door had been opened, just a crack. It was the first time he had ever stayed the night. It would not be the last. That one night became a recurring theme. The excuses were always plausible, always reasonable. A late drive became an early morning practice. An impending storm became a forecast of fatigue. The ritual slowly, subtly, changed its shape. The first few times, he took the bed and I took the couch, a clear demarcation of space. Then, one night, I woke up in the pre-dawn gray to find him standing in the living room doorway. Couldn't sleep, he mumbled, a ghost in the half-light. Mind if I just crash out here? The bed feels too big. He didn't wait for an answer, just grabbed the spare blanket from the armchair and collapsed onto the far end of the couch, turning his back to me. The space between us was a chasm of unspoken things, but we were, for the first time, sharing the same small space. I lay awake for the rest of the night, hyper-aware of his presence, of the sound of his breathing, of the occasional rustle of the blanket as he shifted in his sleep. From there, the boundaries blurred further, eroding slowly like a coastline under a persistent tide. The couch became our default arrangement. He would arrive on a Friday, drop his bag by the door, and we would fall into our easy rhythm of movies and quiet conversation. And when the hour grew late, he would simply stretch out on the couch, pulling a blanket over himself as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I would let him. Each time, my heart would perform a frantic, silent ballet of hope and fear. I would sit in the armchair, pretending to read, my eyes tracing the lines of a book while my entire consciousness was focused on the man sleeping a few feet away. I studied him the way I studied a photograph in the developing tray, watching for the slightest change, the faintest hint of an emerging image. Was this just convenience? Was I just a safe place to land, a piece of human furniture offering comfort without complication? Or was there something else stirring in the quiet space between us? The analysis was a constant, humming engine in the back of my mind. I became a forensic expert of subtle gestures. A hand brushing my arm as he reached for the remote was cataloged and examined for intent. A shared laugh that brought our faces close together was replayed and slowed down, searching for a flicker of something more in his eyes. The nights he fell asleep on the couch were the most intense. Sometimes, in his sleep, he would shift, and an arm would fall across my lap, or a foot would press against my leg. My body would go rigid, every nerve ending firing at once. I would sit for hours, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to disturb the fragile, accidental intimacy of the moment. It was a sweet and terrible form of paralysis. I was both a prisoner and a king in my own living room, held captive by the weight of a sleeping man's hand. I was terrified he would wake up and realize how close he was, that he would recoil in confusion or embarrassment, shattering the delicate illusion. But he never did. He would just sleep on, his breathing a steady, trusting rhythm in the quiet room, completely unaware of the storm he was creating inside of me. The progression of this ritual was a slow, creeping vine, gradually winding its way around the architecture of our friendship, pulling it into a new and unrecognizable shape. What began as a practical solution to a storm became a weekly, unspoken agreement. The pretext of bad weather or late hours eventually faded away entirely, leaving only the ritual itself, stark and unexplained. He would come over, and he would stay. It was just what we did. The couch, however, was small. It was a relic from my college apartment, designed for one person, maybe two people sitting upright. It was not designed for two grown men, one of whom was built like a professional athlete. The physical logistics became a silent negotiation, a nightly dance of arrangement. We would start at opposite ends, a respectable cushion of space between us. But sleep is a great eroder of boundaries. In the unconscious hours of the night, gravity and warmth would pull us together. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find my back pressed against his chest, his arm thrown over my side, his breath warm on the back of my neck. My heart would hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I would lie there, feigning sleep, my mind racing. This had to mean something. It had to. The alternative, that this meant nothing to him, that my body was just a convenient source of warmth, a human pillow, was too painful to contemplate. I started to think of it as the theory of emotional thermodynamics. that two bodies in close proximity would eventually reach a state of equilibrium, sharing heat, sharing space, until the boundaries between them began to dissolve. Was that all this was? A simple physical reality? Or was his unconscious body telling a truth his conscious mind refused to acknowledge? I would photograph him in my mind, creating a catalog of these moments. The way his brow would furrow in sleep when a siren passed on the street below. The way his fingers would sometimes twitch, as if he were swimming in his dreams. The complete and utter vulnerability of his sleeping face, stripped of the guarded focus he wore like armor during the day. I was hoarding these images, these small, stolen intimacies, storing them away like a secret treasure. They were proof, I told myself. Proof that I wasn't imagining the subtle shift in the currents between us. But they were also a source of constant, nagging anxiety. I was living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a sign, a word, a look that would clarify everything. I was trapped in the beautiful, agonizing gray area of the unspoken. The door to my bedroom remained closed. It became a symbol, a final, uncrossed threshold. He slept on my couch. He wore my sweatshirts. He ate my food. He filled my quiet apartment with his restless energy, but he never crossed that particular line. And I never invited him to. It felt like the last bastion of plausible deniability. As long as that door was closed, we were just friends. We were just two guys, one of whom happened to crash on the other's couch a lot. It was unconventional, perhaps, but not definitive. To open that door, to suggest he take the bed, felt like it would be an admission of something I wasn't ready to voice. It would be naming the strange, tender, terrifying thing that was growing between us in the dark. So the door stayed closed, and we continued our nightly dance on the too small couch, a silent testament to our shared avoidance. One night, the unspoken tension reached a new, almost unbearable pitch. He had had a terrible week of training. His coach had been relentless, his times were slipping, and the pressure of the upcoming trials was a constant, grinding weight. He arrived at my apartment looking hollowed out, his usual energy replaced by a deep, weary stillness. He barely spoke, just sank onto the couch and stared at the opposite wall. I made him tea, and he held the warm mug in his hands, his knuckles white. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the hum of the city outside my window. Eventually, he set the mug down and just laid down. He curled up on his side, facing the back of the couch, his body a tight knot of tension. I sat in my usual armchair, watching the rigid line of his spine. A few minutes later, I heard a sound, a small, choked sob that he tried to smother in the cushion. My heart cracked. In all the years I had known him, I had never seen him cry. Not once. He was the strong one, the resilient one, the one who met every challenge with a fierce, unwavering determination. To see him so completely undone was to see a monument crumble. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to go to him, to touch him, to offer some kind of physical comfort. But the rules of our friendship, the invisible lines we had always so carefully observed, held me in place. Instead, I just spoke his name, my voice soft in the quiet room. Julian. He didn't answer, but his shoulders shook with another silent sob. I got up, my movements slow and deliberate, and sat on the edge of the couch, near his feet. I didn't touch him. I just sat there, a quiet presence in his sea of misery. It's okay, I whispered to the back of his head. Whatever it is, it's okay. He uncurled slightly, and after a long moment, he rolled over to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a despair that stole my breath. I don't think I can do it, Leo, he rasped, his voice thick with unshed tears. I think I'm going to fail. And I don't know who I am if I'm not this. And then he did something that shattered all the unspoken rules. He reached out, not for a comforting pat on the back, but for me. He grabbed a handful of my shirt and just pulled, a desperate, wordless plea. I went, tumbling forward onto the couch with him. He wrapped his arms around me and buried his face in my chest, and his body was racked with the kind of sobs that come from a place of deep, foundational pain. I held him. I wrapped my arms around his shaking frame and held him tightly, my hand stroking his hair, whispering nonsensical, soothing words into the crown of his head. There was nothing platonic about it. It was raw and desperate and deeply, profoundly intimate. We were no longer two separate bodies occupying the same space. We were one tangled, grieving, comforting mass. He was clinging to me like a drowning man, and I was holding him like he was the most precious thing in the world. And in that moment, holding his brokenness in my arms, I knew that I was completely, irrevocably lost. I loved him. I loved him in a way that defied friendship, in a way that was terrifying and absolute. And I had no idea what to do. He cried himself to sleep in my arms. His sobs eventually subsided into shuddering breaths, and then into the slow, steady rhythm of deep exhaustion. I lay there under his weight, my own body aching with a mixture of sorrow for his pain and a selfish, soaring joy at being the one he turned to. The scent of him, of salt and soap and sorrow, filled my senses. His tears had soaked the front of my shirt, a warm, damp patch over my heart. I could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his own heart gradually slowing against my ribs, sinking with mine. This was it. This was the moment of truth. The lines were gone. The boundaries had been washed away by a tide of grief. When he woke up, things would have to be different. He couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened. He couldn't retreat back to the safe, ambiguous space we had occupied for so long. He had pulled me into his storm, and now we were both in the eye of it. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just held him, and I waited for the dawn, which felt less like a promise and more like an impending verdict. The crossing didn't happen that night, as I had expected. The morning after his breakdown was achingly, confusingly normal. He woke up slowly, extricating himself from my arms with a groggy, mumbled apology. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was embarrassed, ashamed of his vulnerability. He deflected, making a joke about how he drooled on my shirt, his voice strained with a false lightness. He retreated behind his usual walls so quickly and so completely that I was left wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. The raw, desperate intimacy of the night before was gone, replaced by the familiar, comfortable scaffolding of our friendship. He made coffee, we talked about the weather, and then he left, an awkward, one-armed hug at the door. "Thanks, man," he'd said, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "For, everything." And then he was gone, leaving a Julian-shaped silence in my apartment and a profound confusion in my heart. For the next 2 weeks, he kept his distance. The ritual was broken. He didn't come over. His texts were brief, functional. He was busy, he said. Training was intense. I knew he was avoiding me. He was avoiding what had happened on my couch. The pendulum had swung from intense, unspoken intimacy to a polite, painful distance. And I was lost. I had allowed myself to hope, and that hope was now a bitter taste in my mouth. I had misinterpreted everything. I was just his safe place, his emotional first aid kit. He had used me to patch himself up, and now that he was feeling better, he had put me back on the shelf. The thought was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. The pain of my unrequited love, which had been a dull, manageable ache for so long, had sharpened into something acute and unbearable. The silence from him was louder than any argument. I had to know. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. I had to risk the beautiful, broken thing our friendship had become, because the not knowing was destroying me. The night it finally happened was a Thursday. I hadn't heard from him in 3 days, and a quiet, desperate panic had begun to set in. I was developing photos in my darkroom, the familiar chemical smell and the safe, red light usually a comfort, but tonight they did nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. I was staring at an image of him, one I had taken months ago at the lake. He was laughing, his head thrown back, water glistening on his skin. It was a picture of pure, uncomplicated joy. It was a picture of a man I felt I was losing. And then I heard a key in my front door. He still had the spare I'd given him a year ago, for emergencies. My heart stopped. He had never used it before without calling first. I wiped my hands and stepped out of the darkroom, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He was standing in the middle of my living room, his duffel bag at his feet. He looked lost. His hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't looking at me, but at the couch. Our couch. The scene of the crime. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with everything unsaid. I was the one who broke it. Julian. My voice was barely a whisper. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a chaotic mixture of fear and exhaustion and something else, something I couldn't name. I'm sorry, he said, his voice hoarse, for just showing up. And for the other week. For being weird. You don't have to apologize, I said, my own voice steadier than I felt. Are you okay? He shook his head, a small, helpless gesture. No, he said. I'm not. He took a step towards me, then another. He stopped when there was only a foot of air between us. The air was electric. I could feel the heat coming off his skin. I could smell the rain on his jacket. He was staring at my mouth, and my breath hitched in my throat. This was it. The air was thin. The world had narrowed to this small space between our bodies. The moment was suspended, fragile as spun glass. He was waiting. He was giving me the choice. To step back and rebuild the walls, or to stand my ground and let them fall. I did not step back. I held his gaze, and for the first time, I let him see everything. I let him see the years of quiet longing, the hope, the fear, the absolute, unconditional love I felt for him. I put it all in my eyes, a silent confession. His own gaze softened, the fear receding, replaced by a look of dawning, wondrous recognition. As if he were seeing me, truly seeing me, for the very first time. He raised a hand, his movements slow, hesitant. He didn't touch my face. He rested his palm flat against my chest, right over my heart. He could feel it, I knew. He could feel the frantic, terrified, hopeful pounding. His thumb stroked the fabric of my shirt, a small, circular motion that sent a shockwave through my entire system. Leo, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. And then he asked the question that changed everything. The question that took all the ambiguity and all the uncertainty and burned it away, leaving only a clear, terrifying, beautiful truth. Would it be okay? It wasn't a question about a kiss. It was a question about everything. About crossing the line. About changing the world. About risking the only thing that had ever felt truly certain in his life. It was a plea for permission, an offering of his own vulnerability. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I couldn't find my voice, so I just nodded, a single, decisive movement. My entire future hinged on that nod. And then he leaned in, and he kissed me. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss like in the movies. It was quiet. It was tentative. It was a question. His lips were soft, hesitant against mine, a gentle pressure that was asking more than it was taking. I responded in kind, a soft press back that said yes. Yes, it's okay. Yes, this is real. Yes, finally. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and fear and a hope so profound it ached. It was a confession, a surrender, a beginning. We stood there in the middle of my living room for a long time, just our lips pressed together, the world falling away, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in our brand new universe. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his eyes were closed. His hand was still on my chest, a warm, steady anchor. Okay, he breathed out, a sigh of profound, shuddering relief. Okay, the aftermath was not a sun-drenched meadow of immediate understanding. It was a foggy, uncertain landscape that we had to navigate with clumsy, hesitant steps. The kiss had been a lightning strike, illuminating everything for a single, brilliant moment. But when the light faded, we were left in the quiet, disorienting dark, with the thunder still rolling in the distance. The morning after, the awkwardness returned, but it was a different flavor. It wasn't the shame-faced avoidance of before. It was the tender, fragile anxiety of two people who had just handled something precious and were terrified of dropping it. He had slept on the couch again, but this time, when I woke up, he was awake too, watching me. The look in his eyes was not one of regret, but of deep, churning confusion. He looked like a man who had woken up in a foreign country, a country he recognized on some deep, instinctual level, but whose language he did not yet speak. He left that morning with a quiet, "I'll call you," that felt both like a promise and a threat. And then, the silence began again. But this time it was worse. Before the kiss, there was ambiguity, a space for my hope to live and breathe. Now, there was a definitive event, a fact that could not be undone. And his silence in the face of that fact felt like a rejection. My mind, my relentless, analytical mind, went into overdrive. I had pressured him. He was emotionally vulnerable, and I had taken advantage. He was confused about his life, and he had mistaken his need for comfort for something else. He was straight, and this was a fluke, a momentary lapse in judgment that he now deeply regretted. The narratives I spun were intricate and painful, each one a different shade of self-recrimination. The joy and relief of that kiss curdled into a sickening dread. I had been given a glimpse of a beautiful, impossible world, and then the door had been slammed shut in my face. I had risked our friendship, and I had lost. After 4 days of agonizing silence, broken only by a single, monosyllabic text from him that said, "Need to think," I couldn't take it anymore. The quiet observer had to become the actor. The passive harbor had to send out a ship of its own. I drove to him. The 4-hour drive to his training facility was a blur of highway hypnosis and a churning internal monologue. I had no plan. I just knew that I couldn't let it end like this, in a fog of misunderstanding and fear. I needed to hear it from him, whatever it was. I needed the clarity, even if that clarity was going to break my heart. I found him at the pool, of course. I stood on the observation deck, watching him slice through the water, lap after lap after lap. He was punishing himself. His form was powerful, aggressive, but lacked its usual fluid grace. He was fighting the water, not working with it. He was trying to outrun the thoughts in his own head. When his set was finally over, he pulled himself out of the pool, his body heaving, and he saw me. He froze, water streaming from his body, his face a mask of shock and something that looked a lot like fear. He didn't say anything, just grabbed a towel and walked towards the locker room. I followed him. The confrontation happened between rows of cold, metal lockers, the air thick with the smell of chlorine and damp towels. He wouldn't look at me, focusing on toweling his hair with frantic, jerky movements. "What are you doing here, Leo?" he asked, his voice low and tight. "You know why I'm here," I said, my own voice surprisingly calm. The fear had burned away, leaving a core of quiet resolve. "We need to talk about this, Julian. You can't just kiss me like that and then disappear." He finally stopped, his hands stilling in his hair. He leaned his head against the lockers with a soft thud, his eyes closed. "I know," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" I pressed, my voice still quiet, but insistent. "Sorry you did it? Or sorry you ran away?" He opened his eyes and looked at me, and the raw, unfiltered confusion in them was staggering. "I don't know," he said, and his honesty was a punch to the gut. "Leo, I don't know what I'm doing. My whole life has been a straight line. From this point to that point. Get good. Win the race. And now, everything is a mess. I'm losing. My career might be over before it even starts. Sarah's gone, and you've been the only thing that's made sense. The only person I can breathe around." He pushed himself off the lockers and started pacing, a caged, restless animal. "And then that night, the other week, I was a mess, and you were just there. You were so solid. And when I fell asleep, I dreamed I was drowning, and you were holding my head above the water." He stopped and looked at me, his expression desperate. "And then I kissed you, and it felt right. It felt more right than anything has felt in a goddamn year. And that scares the hell out of me. Because what does that mean? What am I supposed to do with that? I'm destroying our friendship. I'm taking the one good, pure thing I have left in my life, and I'm ruining it." The dam had broken. His words tumbled out, a torrent of fear and confusion and a desperate, emerging truth. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself, from a feeling that didn't fit into the neat, orderly blueprint he'd drawn for his life. And in that moment, all my own hurt and anxiety dissolved, replaced by a wave of profound, aching tenderness. He wasn't the unknowing initiator anymore. He knew, and it was breaking him apart. I closed the distance between us, standing in his path, forcing him to stop pacing. I put my hands on his wet, trembling shoulders. "Hey," I said softly, making him meet my eyes. "Look at me." He did, his gaze uncertain. "You're not ruining it," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "The only thing that could ruin this is us not being honest. You think our friendship is so fragile it can't handle this? After everything? It's the strongest thing in my life, Julian. It's strong enough to hold this too. It's strong enough to change." A tear traced a path through the beads of water on his cheek. "But what if I'm just confused?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "What if I hurt you? You're already hurting me by shutting me out," I said, my own voice thick with emotion now. "The kiss, it wasn't a mistake for me, Julian. It was everything. But I would rather have you as my friend, honestly and completely, than have this ghost of you. So you need to decide. But you need to decide with me. Not alone in your head, 100 miles away. We talked this through. Together." Whatever it is, he stared at me, his eyes searching mine, and I saw the conflict, the fear, and the slow, dawning flicker of hope. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine, just as he had after the kiss. The gesture was one of utter exhaustion and surrender. "I don't want to lose you, Leo," he murmured into the small space between us. "You won't," I promised, my hands tightening on his shoulders, holding him steady. "You won't." The resolution did not arrive like a sudden sunrise, but like a slow, patient dawn, the light creeping over the horizon and gradually, gently, illuminating the landscape. Our conversation in the locker room was not an end, but a beginning. It was the opening of a door to a new room, one we had to furnish together. We talked for hours that day, first in the sterile quiet of the locker room, and then in his soulless, temporary apartment. He talked about the suffocating pressure of expectations, both his own and his family's. He talked about his relationship with Sarah, how he had loved her, but how it had always felt like he was playing a role he had been assigned. He talked about his friendship with me, how it had always been the one place where he felt he didn't have to perform, where he could just be. And as he talked, a new narrative began to emerge, one that he had never allowed himself to read before. The feelings he had for me, which he had labeled as friendship, as brotherhood, were deeper, more complex, more central to his being than he had ever understood. I, in turn, finally confessed the depth and breadth of my own feelings. I told him about the years of quiet observation, the catalog of small moments, the ache of loving him in silence. I laid my heart bare, not as a demand or an ultimatum, but simply as a statement of fact, a piece of the puzzle he was trying to solve. There were tears from both of us. There was fear. There was a profound, terrifying vulnerability. But underneath it all, there was a current of relief. The truth, in all its messy, complicated glory, was finally out in the open air. The ambiguity that had been both a comfort and a poison was gone. We didn't kiss again that day. We didn't fall into bed. The physical intimacy that had started this whole avalanche was put on hold. We needed to rebuild the foundation first, this time with honesty as our bedrock. He asked for time, not to run away, but to process, to reconcile this new understanding of himself with the man he had always thought he was. And I gave it to him. But this time, the distance was different. It wasn't a silence. It was a space for growth. We talked on the phone every night. The conversations were different now, stripped of subtext. They were open, questioning, sometimes clumsy, but always honest. He was learning a new language for his own emotions, and I was learning to be patient, to be a partner in his discovery, not just a catalyst for it. A few weeks later, he showed up at my door again. There was no storm this time, no late hour. It was a bright Saturday afternoon. He had his duffel bag in his hand, but he also had a box filled with some of his books and a framed picture of us from college. He looked at me, a small, nervous smile on his face. "Is it okay?" he started, his voice quiet. "If I stay for a while?" And I don't mean on the couch. My heart did a slow, quiet turn in my chest. I stepped aside and held the door open for him. "Yeah," I said, my own smile breaking through. "It's okay." And so our new life began. It was a life of quiet domesticity, of learning each other in a new light. The couch was no longer a space of agonizing ambiguity. It was just a place to watch movies, our legs tangled together without a second thought. The closed bedroom door was now open, an invitation, not a barrier. Waking up next to him was a miracle I never got used to. Seeing his face in the morning light, peaceful in sleep, was a photograph I took with my heart every single day. We were slow, we were gentle. Our physical relationship unfolded with the same patient tenderness as our emotional one. Every touch was intentional, every kiss a confirmation. We were learning to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. I still catch myself watching him sometimes, this incredible man who stormed into my quiet life and rearranged all the furniture. I see him making coffee in my kitchen, his bare feet on the worn wooden floor, the morning sun catching the line of his back, and I feel a sense of peace so profound it's like coming home after a long, long journey. The restless energy is still there, but it's softer now, tempered by a newfound stillness. He didn't win the Olympic trials that year. He came close, but the pressure and the emotional turmoil had taken their toll. And the surprising thing was, he was okay with it. He found a new path, coaching a youth swim team, where his passion for the water could be a gift, not a burden. He found a new definition of himself, one that wasn't measured in hundredths of a second. There are moments in your life that are not turning points, but arrival points. They are the quiet aftermath, the gentle settling of dust after the redesign. They are the realization that the key that turned in the lock didn't open a single room, but an entire new wing of the house you call your life. My life is no longer a series of rooms built for one. It is a shared space, filled with light and warmth and the steady, comforting rhythm of another person's breathing. It is the quiet certainty of a hand reaching for yours in the dark. It is the profound, simple peace of knowing you are not just a harbor, but a home. And that home is not a place, but a person. It's the beautiful, honest silence we learned to create together.